Okay, so we start off with normally with a prayer. I'll ask Teddy to start and then we'll get going. This is from lesson 245. Your peace is with me, Father. I am safe. Your peace surrounds me, Father. Where I go, your peace goes there with me. It sheds its light on everyone I meet. I bring it to the desolate and lonely and afraid. I give your peace to those who suffer pain or grieve for loss, or think they are bereft of hope and happiness. Send them to me, my Father. Let me bring your peace with me. For I would save your Son, as is your will, that I may come to recognize myself. And so we go in peace to all the world to give the message that we have received. And thus we come to hear the voice of God who speaks to us as we relate his word, whose love we recognize because we share the word that he has given unto us. Okay, so Teddy, you know how this goes. We're looking for your spiritual journey, what's happened to you. You can start where you like, but I'd like to sort of go back a bit and somewhere along the line include when you were smacked on the back of the head with a book by someone.
Well, I would feel better. I mean, I could tell stories, which is fine, but I would feel better if I was dealing with questions that people had or things that were of interest. So if, you could give me a frame of reference to deal with, that would work for me. And as far as getting smacked in the back of the head with a book, it's interesting because I entirely forgot about that until just recently. And obviously, I mean, it happened to me at a very early age with nuns. I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. It was only kindergarten or maybe pre-kindergarten, I don't even know. And one day a nun just walked up to me and picked up a book and whacked me in the back of the head and said, I know you must have done something. That's for whatever you did. And that's the way the nuns treated me throughout grammar school. And the Jesuits were the same way. I was sort of like the target, and I was always in trouble for something, whether or not people did similar stuff, but they didn't seem to get punished in the same way. And all these memories were sort of gone until just recently. And I began to remember them. It's interesting when I look back on it, because, what the nun says is sort of like what's in the back of all of our minds as to why we feel guilty. We must have done something, but we don't even remember what it is. And to a certain degree, that's the idea of separation. Somehow we did something to separate ourselves from reality. We don't know how or why because we can't remember. And yet we're dealing with the consequences of that. And this leads into an experience that I had with Jesus, I guess. At one point in time, I was living in California in Carmel Valley. We had a restaurant and I was the waiter. I ran the front of the restaurant. And it was all guys that I knew from New York City who I had been getting high with for years and years. And all of a sudden, they came to me and told me that I was doing too many drugs. And to hear it from druggies was sort of like, whoa, what's that all about? So I remember sitting down in the backyard one night and just like thinking of this whole thing and saying, wow, what's really going on here? And all of a sudden, Jesus, who has come to me before, this wasn't the first time. I mean, I had been having visions and, hearing voices from when I was 6 years old, when I was a kid. Jesus came to me and he said, you you're doing this to yourself. My first thought was, all of it? And he showed me how I had done this to myself from the beginning of time to the end of time. He said, you did this to yourself from the beginning of time to the end of time. And suddenly there was this sense of, and I use it as a phrase sometimes now, total responsibility is what freedom is. When I realized that I was responsible, it was such a freeing idea, because I realized that if I did this, I could do something else. And the other part of it was that I wasn't being punished by God for something I did. And that was like this major, I don't even know how to say it. It was a major release from an idea. And at that moment, this is one thing I never know how to even talk about, is God showed up. And it was like there was this tiny mad idea in my mind that I was being punished by God. I saw that God was only love. And as I laughed at the stupidity of the idea in my mind, it's like he plucked the idea right out of my mind. And I had this experience of total salvation. Like, I saw that not only was I saved, but everybody was saved along with me. And I was just in this profound, joyous state of recognizing salvation and understanding that, not only was I saved, but that everybody was saved, because nobody was responsible for what was going on but me. And having accepted responsibility, nobody had to deal with the idea of separation anymore. And Jesus told me at that point in time, he said, just tell your brothers to love each other as they would like to be loved, and they'll begin to understand God's love, and they will come to know. And in a sense, Kevin, when you read this lesson today, there's talk about we're all given a message. In a sense, that was the message that I was given. It remains the same message today as when that happened. And that happened, I think I was 36 years old, so how long ago was that? 32 years ago. And when I think of it, it's as fresh of an experience and as freeing. It was literally, I was so joyous. I went around talking about this. I realized I didn't have to get high anymore, so I stopped getting high, I stopped doing drugs. My parents, my brother and my father wanted me to go into a rehab. So I checked myself into a rehab. They didn't know whether I was crazy from coming off drugs, which was part of the problem, or I was just crazy from this experience that I had. I was just in a condition of not being able to stop talking about what had happened to me, to everyone and everybody. After about, maybe 8 days there or so, 10 days, this guy who was my counselor, he said to me, I've talked to everybody here, and they all think what might help you is if you take a look at this book, because it might explain what happened to you. So he gave me this book, and I looked at the cover, and it said A Course in Miracles. I opened it up to the middle of the book, and the first page, the very first line I read was, the secret to salvation is you're doing this to yourself. That was it. When I read that line, I slammed the book closed, and I said, this book is from Jesus. And my counselor said to me, we've been reading this for years and we're not sure about that yet. So I said to him, listen, all I know is he and I are the only two who know this. And I don't remember writing the book. So it has to be from him. I never had a question about who the book was from. From that time, I used it while I was there, and then I had to give it back to him. So there was about a month or 2 months when I didn't have the book. But it didn't matter. There was something that was confirmed in me. I had stopped getting high. I moved back to New York, and my parents couldn't take me because I was talking so much about stuff. So I moved up to Boston, and I was working at a restaurant. I was working 2 shifts. I was working a lunch and dinner shift. So I had some time between the shifts. So I started to walk around Harvard Square, and I saw this little bookstore in the basement of a building. It was a really small place. And I went down there, and it had this shelf, and there was a spiritual shelf. And it was the first time I ever saw the book for sale. It said The Course in Miracles was sitting there on the shelf. And I didn't have the money to afford it. I couldn't afford the book. That's all I can say. I got to tell you something else that's really interesting about this whole story. It wasn't until just recently when I realized why Jesus asked me to print the sparkly and give it away freely. It's because not everybody can afford the book because of the price it is. It was also because he wanted Bill Thetford's edition out, and he wanted to be recognized as the author. And that's all he said to me after we won the court case. And I didn't have any intention of doing anything after the court case. So it wasn't until months after that when I got the message, publish Bill Thetford's edition, put my name on the cover as author, and give it away. And it's taken me all these years to realize, talk about slow. It's taken me all these years to realize, why he gave it to me that way. It was because it was like I had this experience of knowing the book would be helpful, but not being able to afford it. And if there's other people in the world who are like that, they deserve to have this book and they deserve to be given it in the way Jesus wanted it. And he says, protect everything you value by the act of giving it away. So that's what I do. Right now, we're in the process of, Annie's getting it up on print on demand on Amazon, along with Helen's notes. And at some point in time, we'll have enough money to print more copies. And this is about the 4th time we did it. We did it first in Australia, and I've done it twice here. It's just interesting how all this sort of ties together. But for the life of me, for years, I didn't see the tie. Like I didn't understand why I was giving it away. I just knew I was asked. I said yes. I've always said yes to Jesus when he's talked to me or presented things to me. And he's always proved right. So whether I understand or not, I just say yes to my brother.
Okay, Teddy, what about you go back to the bookshop and tell us what sort of happened in your journey from there?
The interesting thing about it is, I didn't know anything about the Course. I saw on the shelf there was A Course in Miracles, and there were also these 2 little pamphlets that were $3 each. What was Ken's pamphlet?
Song of Prayer and Psychotherapy.
Oh, right. Psychotherapy, Practice and Purpose, and Song of Prayer. So I did have $3. So one day I bought one of those, and another day I bought another one of those. And that's sort of what introduced me to the book. My father and brother still wanted me to see a counselor, so I was going to therapy. I was still going to therapy. And I mentioned the whole thing to the counselor, and he said to me, listen, if that book is so important to you, it's worth spending the $39 on the book, isn't it? And it dawned on me, yeah, I guess it would be. So as soon as I had enough tips from working one day, I went down and I bought the book. And I started to read it. And that's what I would do. The way I read it at first was sort of haphazardly. I would just open the book up and read, and sometimes I'd read, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs, and I don't think I ever read more than 3 pages. I would read 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then something in those paragraphs would just hit me. And all I could do was just sit in contemplation and communication with the Holy Spirit or Jesus, whoever it was at the time, and sort of sit there. And there were times I would sit there like for an hour or 2, just contemplating whatever the message was in the 3 paragraphs or in the 3 pages. And I did that for a while, maybe 9 months. I did it for a bunch of months. I mean, it was so profound that I started to wonder if anybody was reading this book. I wanted to see if somebody else was reading this book and it was hitting them the way it was hitting me, because it just blew me away. I mean, I knew it was Jesus. Like I said, Jesus has been communicating with me since I was a kid. That's a story I'd like to tell too at some point. And so I just had this thought, wow, it would be great, incredible to meet someone who's also doing this, because it's almost as if I needed validation to see if whether I was out of my mind or whether this was true, because it was like, it's so deep, so profound, and so joyous for me at that time, and that I wanted some sort of validation or confirmation. So one day I picked up, what was a newspaper? The Sunday News, the magazine section. So one day I was reading the Sunday News, the magazine section, and there was an article about a woman named Vicki Thomas who had a restaurant in downtown Boston. She read A Course in Miracles. It had groups there. There were groups. So I knew that I had to meet her. So did I go to the restaurant?
TS.
Oh, the TS. So there were meetings at the Theosophical Society at the time. Her and some of you guys, Cole knows, Claire, Diane, and Steph. So Vicki and Claire Diane were sort of like partners in these meetings. So one day I just walked into the meeting, and somehow there was a recognition. That's all I could say. And eventually the restaurant closed I was working in. Vincent's closed. I went to work part-time at Vicky's. Vicky and I started to hang out together. I went to work full-time at Vicky's, and Vicky and I got married. That was the nature of, what went on based on following the leads from just reading this book. I don't know how to say it. It's like the message and the book were predominant in my life. It was more important than what I was doing or where I was doing it. And the two of them just seemed to blend together. All of a sudden, my life as a Course in Miracles student wasn't separate from my life in space and time either, because, Vicki had groups, and I started to do the groups with her, and other things started to happen. We had meetings at the restaurant. There were, and even people living at Alice and Grace living at the restaurant, and Alice was a Course student. So there was something sort of all coming together in that, based on, my utilizing A Course in Miracles. The next thing that happened was the old man came, wasn't it?
Well, we spent a few years doing events, all sorts of events.
Right.
And then Joy came.
That's right. Then what happened was, we would have events, and people would get together, and all of a sudden, I think Vicki got a message from people in Wisconsin.
No.
No?
We did 3 years worth of events, and then we ran a big event in Omega, and the guys from Wisconsin came.
Oh, right, on the bus.
On the bus.
60 of them came on a
Right.
bus.
we had a couple hundred people
Right.
at the retreat. We ran this.
And it was Diana and all the guys from the academy. All of a sudden they showed up, and his was this whole community of people. But the old man wasn't there.
No.
The old man wasn't there.
No.
But
You
Vicky
had-
followed the bus back.
Yeah, I wanted to go meet him, but you had an experience with Diana.
Oh yeah, I did. That's right. I had an experience with Diana where it was like, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, my mind opened up. We were joined. Oh, and I'm remembering in the middle of the experience, she looked over and said, "Thank you," because we were having a shared experience. She just looked over to me and said, "Thank you." That was it. Now we heard there was a guy called the master teacher. So Vicky and Claire Diane and Teddy,
Yeah, we took Teddy.
they followed the bus back to Wisconsin. I stayed to make sure the restaurant was okay. And I went out there. I flew out and I got there. And that's when I heard the old man.
And as soon as you walked in, he said, "Here's the navigator."
Yeah, right. He called me the navigator. When I walked in the room, he said, "Oh, here's the navigator."
Here's Hector.
And there's Hector, he's the navigator. And that was my name. So I was sitting there, and about the third day being there, and the old man, I could hear that somehow he had the same experience I had. And he knew that I had the same experience he had. And the old man was wild. This guy was wild. He was an ex-alcoholic from Chicago. He used to go to the TS too. He went to the TS. After he had his experience, he didn't know what to do either. So he went to the TS too. He started to read the course. Right away, he started to have people surround him and have groups. Like he was always reticent. So somehow he started to stay in this little house in Wisconsin, and people started to show up, like Diana and other people. And all of a sudden, there was a house across the street. They called it the main house. And there were about 60 people there who had come to Boston. So when we got there, there was about 60 people. I walked in. He said, "Here's Hector. He's the navigator." After about 3 days, I didn't know what the hell to do or why I was there. So I stopped. And I said, "Jesus, like, what am I doing? Like, what's this all about? What would you have me do?" And he said to me, "Just serve the master teacher." That's it. He said, "Serve the master teacher." And that's all I knew to do. I became the administrator. He made me the administrator of everything. And we wound up having 4 places around the world, decent sized places. And him and I traveled all over the United States. I remember I was telling somebody today, we went to Europe to teach in Germany, and we drove all around Europe together. I was just there to serve. If we were in a car together, I drove the car. Didn't matter whose car it was. I drove. He sat in the back seat. It was like when I was a limousine driver. I sat in the front and drove the car. He sat in the back seat. And that's just the way it was. And I was Hector, the navigator, driving him around. And we were just in this together. That's the way it came together. It's really wild on it. And it was all based on guidance around this idea that were presented in A Course in Miracles. I've never needed another spiritual teaching, although I've read many. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't until I started to hang out back with you guys for maybe 10 years, I didn't even pick up the book. And it wasn't because it wasn't still part of me. It's just that somehow it was ingrained. Even in California, I've had some weird experiences. When Jerry Garcia died, Jesus told me this whole story about how they were Isaac and Esau. Jesus had been given the kingdom because when he wore a wool garment, Abraham was supposed to give it to the oldest son. and Jerry was the oldest son. But he was off to war, and the mother brought in the younger son in a cloak that was hairy. And when he felt it, he thought it was the oldest son, so he gave the son the kingdom. And when the oldest son came back, he was left to wander in the desert for 40 years, 40 days, 40 nights. He didn't have a kingdom. And Jesus one day came to me and told me that Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead were teaching A Course in Miracles through music and the words in their songs. And Jerry's explicit orders were not to use the words of A Course in Miracles, but to use his own words in the songs to teach it. And when Jerry died, Jesus told me that they had made amends, they were back together, and Jesus gave Jerry like the keys to the kingdom and made him the lead man. So Jerry was sort of like the head of the atonement. And I would talk to Jesus, and Jesus would say, no, no, no. Talk to Jerry. Don't talk to me. Talk to Jerry. And it was really hard for me to believe that. But I had these experiences of Jerry and joining with Jerry and being so incredibly elevated in this total experience that was unlike experiences that I had with Jesus. Like Jesus, it was like joining with a brother. Jerry, it was like joining with something that took me beyond, and I was so encapsulated in this total energy. And whenever I would question whether it was really Jerry or not, I'd have this same experience. So at one point in time when I was in California, this guy named Mark showed up, and Jesus told me, just take care of Mark. And so I had Mark move in with me, and I just took care of him for years until it was time to come back here. But that's the way it happened. One thing I wanted to say, and then I'd love for people to ask questions, point me in a direction, because I never know what direction to go with this. The very first vision I had was, what year did JFK get shot?
63.
63.
Yeah.
So I was 11 years old. Okay. When I was about 6 years old, what year did he get elected?
1960.
Okay, in 1960, that means 52, I was 8 years old. When I was 8 years old on election night, I was delirious. I was screaming to my parents to call up. All I kept on saying is, you got to call him and tell him don't be president because he was going to get shot. And I had this vision, and I could see him in the limousine getting shot. And I was yelling and screaming and yelling and screaming and demanding that my parents call JFK. And I was a kid. I had no idea you couldn't do that. Just call him up and tell him, don't become president because you're going to get shot. They just thought I was out of a stock raving mad. And then a few years later, it happened. I had another experience like that where I was shown Beauty Queen face down in a pool of water. And she had died in the pool. And, I thought I was crazy. And then that summer, I was at my summer house, and the newspaper came, and here was the very picture that I was shown of this woman in full gown, dead, face down in the swimming pool. So stuff like that was happening to me when I was a little kid. And even at one point, I don't know how old I was. I must have been late 20s. Maybe I was 28. I was sitting in my parents' living room, and I was very stoned on heroin. Now, I never shot heroin because we would get it pure through connections, Sicilian, blah, 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 because I lived in the neighborhood. And so we used to get this pure heroin, and my cousin and I would snort it. So I went home one day. My parents were away for the weekend. I lived in the back house, and I was watching TV at their bedroom. And I knew if I closed my eyes and fell asleep, that I was going to OD and die. I mean, I just knew it. And I could not help myself. And all of a sudden, my body was lying on the floor, and I was leaving my body. And as I was leaving, Jesus showed up, and he said to me, you know, that's not going to solve your problem. And I looked down, and I saw that my parents were going to come into the room and think that the body on the floor was their son, dead. I was going to know that they thought that was me. I was not going to be dead but alive, and they were going to be miserable, and I'd still be miserable because of what happened. So that happened, and I just said, it's not going to solve my problem. And I went down, I went back in my body, and I just came back around. That's all I can say. So I have been having experiences like that, and Jesus had been talking to me and telling me stuff long before I even discovered A Course in Miracles. So, you know, we had developed a trust in that he had always been true to me, and talking to him and communicating with him was as real or more real than communicating with people in the planet, because it's like he really did know everything. Like he didn't have to be told the story to find out what's happening. He just knew everything that was going on and would communicate to me like he was my best friend. And to this day, it's like, you know, this guy is my best friend, my best brother. There's no way in the world for me not to trust anything that comes from him. It takes me a while for some of this stuff to understand why things like this happen. But of course says, death does not solve your problem, because there's no such thing as death. And I realized that before I read the Course, but I didn't know, like it didn't dawn on me what exactly that it meant until years later, when it finally hits you, when you're in a situation and you begin like, duh, you know, and it always makes me laugh because I feel like such a dummy. Like I feel like such a moron that it really makes me laugh at the degree of unknowing that we're in, thinking that we know something. We you know, maybe you guys do. I don't know anything. I have to learn everything. And some things work and help me. And, you know, like he says in the Course, use what's useful, and whatever's not useful, don't even bother with. Don't worry about it. You have one problem, there's one solution, and you have a function that you need to fulfill. As you go along, you find out what the function is. And that's our key to going beyond the world of space and time and not needing it any longer. That's been my goal. That's been what I've been attuned to since, you know, I've had these experiences. It's not about being in the world. It's like knowing who I am as created by God, and knowing there's a way and a function that we must fulfill, and the desire for not only me, but for no one. I don't want anybody to have to repeat this, which is why when I had the experience of salvation, I saw that everybody was saved. It's like there wasn't anyone who was not saved and saved along with me. And all they have to do is forget about healing the separation. All they have to do is love their brother, and they'll begin to know the love of God. And in coming to know the love of God, everything that they need to know will be given. In that manner, we no longer need space and time, because we're back to the original idea that we are in God's mind as love, without the need of any healing whatsoever. And if there's any message to anybody, like you guys don't need to heal a separation. You just need to love each other and learn of love. And the more we join in love to love each other, because you can't do this alone, the more we come to know the love of God, because the love of God isn't given to us alone. it's a shared love with our brother. And when we are willing to join with our brother and share only love, now that's not to say that you know how to do it. That's just say there's a willingness to do it because, you look around and you say, wow, this place sucks. This isn't my home. I never feel comfortable here. There is a way in which you can feel comfortable. And that's when you understand you as love and your brother as love. And shared love is what the love of God is. That's all I can say. I don't know if that helps anybody. Annie.
So I entitled this Revelation and the Need for Miracles in Time. I was wondering if you could talk about, because like you said, the willingness to share love, that's how we find out there's no love lacking and there's no love lacking in us, is because of that willingness and us experiencing here in perception the love that's actually ever present in our minds and can be accessed any time that the blocks are dropped. So I was wondering, about, with you personally, like those blocks coming up, how's that been? Because there's still the need for miracles, even though you've had revelation. So even though you've had revelation, even though there's the perfume of that stays with you, you could say when you come back here, you can still be faced with all the same shitty relationships.
Well, you definitely are.
And in a sense, the ego can be on steroids because now you've got this
Exactly.
part where, I know all this and no one else does. So yeah, just, I don't know, maybe speak about some of the relationships, where you've had hatred towards someone, or you're pissed off with someone, stuff like.
You mean like Ian?
Well, I wasn't thinking of anyone in particular.
Well, I was thinking about it because you don't want to have to repeat this. There's a great section in the Course, and what it says is, it talks about the difference between vertical and the horizontal. Revelation is a vertical ascent into a totality of experience in which God's love is revealed to you along with other things. But what he says is, men and brothers, miracles are on the horizontal plane because miracles make minds one and miracles shorten the need for time. Now, the nature of space and time is that we're all going back to the point before it began and after it was over. Time began as an effect of the ego, as an effect of our thought of separation and the need to learn that we're not separate. So time doesn't really go forward, it goes backwards to the point before it began and after it was over, meaning that there's no longer any separation and we have been restored to the love of God and the love of our neighbors as ourselves. So miracles are a way of shortening the need for time. When we join with our brother, it's like we're speeding up the time that it was going to take us to get to the end of time. We're shortening the need for time because at the end of time, there's a recognition or a revelation of the totality of the oneness of man and mankind as being one in God through Christ, as what Christ is. And what he also says is, and this is a good thing for me to remember, he says also, now, miracles are actually more helpful than revelation. And I've come to understand why. Because I could use the revelatory experience to bypass the need for forgiveness. Like I could always jump up into the revelatory experience and know the truth and not have to utilize forgiveness to join with my brother. And that's what's not helpful. And that's something that lately I've come to understand is something that I was doing. Now I need to forgive. I mean, I had this experience of being taken outside of myself and being shown the amount of forgiveness that there was still left for me to have to go through. some of that stuff is overwhelming. When I got a look at it, I was overwhelmed. I mean, I said to the tech crew, I said, wow, I've been told that I don't have to do this again. How am I ever going to get this all done in order to not do it? There's not enough time. And that's where the miracle comes in. The miracle shortened the need for time. So they just laughed at me when I said that. And I understand why. It's because no matter how much I read this in the course, I wasn't applying it to my own understanding. It wasn't coagulating in me. And part of the reason why it wasn't coagulating in me was because I could use the revelation to jump ahead, but not to actually fulfill what I needed to do here, which is see what was necessary for me to forgive within myself. And, this is one of the things that people really don't understand. The nature of the brotherhood is we can't see this stuff by ourselves. We need brothers to help us see it. So the joy of being with brothers is their ability to show you what needs to be forgiven, which is why there's a section in the course that says this doesn't always feel good. When you see that stuff, you don't feel good. And the temptation from the ego's attempt to interpret it for you is to not make it your problem and to take it out on them as if they did something. And that's the exact opposite of what you're being shown. When you look at it from the Holy Spirit's understanding, the Holy Spirit is helping you see things that are buried deep, deep, deep within yourself that you could never, ever get to on your own, that you need and I need to forgive in order for us to fulfill our function, which forgiveness offers us the ability to do, to bring about the non-necessity of space and time so that we could return to the home that we never left. We can return to before time began and after it was over. That's the nature of revelation. Revelation is, he calls it vertical. He says revelation is on the vertical plane. It's like you jump beyond space and time into this revelatory experience where you absolutely know everything and there's no questions. And when I say you know everything, it's like you know that you're love, you know that God created you, you know that this isn't real, and you know that you never left. And then when you're out of the revelation, you're back in space and time. Now you got that memory. But in order to make that memory true for one and for all, for once and for all as well, you need forgiveness. We need miracles to shorten our need for time on a horizontal plane where we join with our brothers in single purpose of healing our minds so that we no longer need the world of space and time. Heal the world. That's how we heal the world. And those are the miracles. He calls them interpersonal. Miracles are interpersonal. Revelation is intrapersonal. So revelation is within yourself, and it takes you beyond the need for space and time. Miracles are interpersonal between brothers in order to heal things that you can't find alone. So one of the things he says is gratitude and appreciation is what we owe our brothers, because without them, we could not do this, because we couldn't see what we need. And the willingness to look at it that way allows our joining with the brother instead of taking out on our brother or recoiling from our brother for those things. Instead of taking out on our brother and recoiling from our brother, it's the willingness to join with our brother and ask the Holy Spirit for help, because we don't know how to help ourselves here. The help that the ego gives us prolongs the need for time because it's selfish help. It only helps us now. it doesn't provide us with what we need to no longer have the problem that we're trying to solve. It prolongs the need for problems because it's not based on solving the problem. It's based on placing everything outside of ourselves and seeing us without the need for forgiveness when we're desperately guilty and we're in need. We're in need to free ourselves from the guilt of separation. So there's only one problem and there's only one solution. The idea is that we're separate. And I assure you, there's no one in this world that's separate from God. And the way we're going to come to learn that is miraculously joining with our brother in the Holy Spirit in order to come to know what love is as brothers, as one. And the oneness of brothers in love is what God created us as. And in that we know God and know ourselves and know our brothers as ourselves. So that's the difference between, the idea of a revelatory experience, which is intrapersonal on a vertical axis, and the difference between a miracle, which is interpersonal, yet on the horizontal axis. And what Jesus is telling us is they are more helpful now. Don't worry about having a revelation. And the truth is, don't worry about having a revelation. Like if you're like me and you're not ready for them, you use it against yourself and against your brothers, when forgiveness could be the key to happiness and the key to recognizing who we are in love, because the love of God created us whole, perfect, and as one, and together in his love. And that's the only way we could truly know of it, to allow it to be useful. We can learn of it alone, but we can't know it as it really is alone. And that's the difference between revelatory experience and a miraculous experience.
That's really important, Teddy, because, a lot of people make the course into a course about enlightenment. And if we think of enlightenment as that experience of revelation, I saw a little description by Sam Cutler on the Going Further, the new movie Going Further, and Sam said enlightenment's the ability to lighten up, which in a sense it's kind of true. But as far as revelation, a lot of people make it into a course about revelation and gaining revelation. And it really isn't cooperating with ourselves in the best manner, because those of us who did experience a lot of light early, it's like he says, it's less than beatific if your mind's not prepared. And so we're much better concentrating on the purification process and learning forgiveness and the undoing.
Forgiveness and miracles are the purification process. This is the way I like to talk about enlightenment. Enlightenment is an experience along the road. It's not the goal. Everybody will have an experience of enlightenment. Seeking enlightenment is seeking what's already been given. You can't find it by seeking it, because your mind has to be free from thought and free from seeking in order for it to occur. So there's going to be a moment in everybody's life where they're just going to forget everything. And in that moment, they're going to experience a moment of enlightenment. And they're going to know what the light is. They're going to know who they are in that instant. And they're going to find out that enlightenment isn't the goal. Forgiveness allows us to fulfill the goal, because the goal is healing of our mind. And enlightenment is just a stop along the way. It's not the goal, it's not the purpose, and it's certainly not the purpose of the course. Now, unfortunately, the course gets put together with all kinds of New Age teachings, and the New Age teachings are not the same as the course. New Age teachings are somehow, if we become enlightened, the world will be a better place. And what the course is teaching is the world's never going to be real, no matter how good or bad it is. And your purpose isn't to make the world a better place. That's an effect not a cause or purpose. So don't seek enlightenment, seek forgiveness and learning, and the world will get lightened up. But enlightenment's not your purpose. Going beyond the need for space and time and escaping the world of space and time is our purpose. And every other New Age discipline gets, if we're just better people, God's going to love us. You know, if we do good, God will love us. God will finally be able to love us because we're good. And that's not what the Course says. The Course says God created you whole and perfect. In reality, you're still whole and perfect. God is only love, and you're an extension of his love. You can never not be that. And the only problem is we have forgotten that. And forgiveness is the key to remembering the truth of who we already are as what love is. And the world, which is a function of separation, is an illusory place that we use for learning rather than for living, because there is no life in the world. Life is of God. Life is of reality. And we are all, as bodies in space-time, equal to the totality of the illusion that the whole illusion is. Whereas we've never left heaven, and we've always been God's love extending, and will always be there no matter what we think. The tiny mad idea is that we think we did something to offend God, and God's going to punish us. He doesn't understand that or think that, and he's incapable of thinking that, because God is love. God is only love, and he created you as an extension of his love. That love is eternal. That love is infinite. So we are eternally and infinitely God's love extending. We can never not be, and there's nothing we need to do to become that. We are that. But here in space and time, and this is why Jesus calls it the forgetting a lot of times in the Course. In the forgetting, that's something that we do not remember. And forgiveness is the way to have that restored to our memory, so that we know the truth of who we are, and the truth of who our brother is, and the truth of the fact that this is an illusion, and it is not our home, because we are at home in heaven where we never left.
It's important to, like when you were saying we're escaping this too, it's not because we're escaping something that's here. We're escaping it by seeing it never really existed.
Exactly. It's just an illusion. It was never real at all. We escape the world by seeing it for what it is. An illusion that we were never in the first place. We're not, there's so many little one-liners. And people love the theology and they love the philosophical ideas that are presented. But it's in the one-liners. You're not a body, you're free. You're still as God created you. But we love the rhetoric. And sometimes Jesus goes on for 2 or 3 pages with the rhetoric before he gets back to a simple statement to tell you the truth of who you are. Because he cannot not do that, because he knows who he is and he knows who you are. And he knows how we come to learn this. And we learn it through forgiveness, not because we did anything wrong, but because we forgot. And in the forgetting, the world rose up and take the place of your reality. And now you got to remember this. We as mind, as a mind in a mind, we as mind in mind and only mind, are eternal and infinite as the mind that created us. So when we think of the world, we think of it in terms of, oh wow, this is enormous and huge, and it's getting bigger, and look at the stars, and look at the sky, and look at how much is out there, and how much we don't see yet. And all that is just the ego feeding us crap. And somewhere, because we're eternal, it's got enough of a hook to make it sound true. but none of what the ego tells us is true. If it is not eternal. If a star can burn for 100 million years, it's not eternal. It's just as not real as us being a body in one lifetime. The magnitude and the length of time mean nothing. You know, he says at one point in time, all this happened in an instant. It's just an instant. In an instant I return. And yet that instant seems to have taken millions and millions of years to occur. But when you return, it was only an instant that you thought you were gone. Only for an instant, in the second of forgetting, did it last. The world lasted only an instant. And in fact, it never was. That's from the Course. That instant can seem to have taken millions and billions of years. Light years, they even call it, you know. None of that is real. Nothing out there is true. Nothing out there is real. That's all I can say. And if anybody can hear just that from me, I'm glad. That's right, the old man. You'd think a second is different from 6 billion years. He was full of those things. He was really, man, he was a trip. You had to laugh. The Dirwinisms, Kevin. One of the things you put up there today. The Dirwinisms. The truth of the matter is, he was as crazy gets. Whether he was whole and perfect, he had experiences of wholeness and perfection, and he could teach us like nobody else I ever knew. And you would laugh your ass off, and the inconsistencies would make you laugh too. So it's not like nobody turned him into a saint like they turned Ken Wapnick into. But, you know, I'll tell you, you know, listening to the old man, it was a trip. And Amazing's here, Jim Marchetti. He was actually, Amazing was the president, and I was the administrator. And we both hung out with the old man. I got to tell you this, and I'm going to tell everybody. Amazing and I never had a single instant where we weren't. There was never, ever a grievance between us. Now, that's more amazing to me than finding grievances. The fact that, you know, we were in line and there was no question between us. That's more amazing to me, that the old man could pick the two of us out of the middle of nowhere and have us be that way. That shows you the vision that he really had, in spite of the crazy nature that he seemed to exhibit sometimes.
So has anyone got any comments or want to ask any questions at this time? Include you, Vicky, if you're still there.
Oh yeah, I'm right there. You know, Teddy, while you were talking about Amazing and you and Dear One, you were a holy trinity. And it was upon that foundation that an expansion happened.
You know, it's true. I mean, we have places all around the world. That's all I can say. And the truth of the matter is, the gratitude I have toward the nature of what the Academy became, because it was very helpful when I got sued by Ken Wapnick. It was actually by Penguin Books. And I remember a day, I had just gotten back from Australia. I was in session the first day, and all of a sudden this summons server, he comes up to me and he gives me this paper, and he gave Jim a paper, and it was that I had to appear in court. And the reason why I had to appear in court were for the booklets. I didn't even know they were booklets. I had no idea that anybody had printed up booklets and given them out. And here was I getting this summons to appear in court. So it was interesting. This is just the synchronicity of things. So after session was over, I was back, so I had to go see the old man anyway. I walked into Dear One's room, and there was Monty, Darla, and Alden. And I said, you know, Dear One, I got this thing for these pamphlets. I got to go to court for it. He said, what are they? And that's when Darla and Alden told me, well, we did those pamphlets. And Vicky was the one who gave them out. It was really amazing, the synchronistic events that occurred. I came to understand why I was being sued. It was because if I couldn't afford a lawyer, they would have won the case. If I would have walked in and not been able to deal with the law at a financial level, the case would have been closed. It was interesting because I went to court. The lawyer at that time was this young guy who worked for Penguin Books. And what I found out was that Penguin was the one who was suing us, Jim and I. And the contract that they had with the foundation only allotted $60,000 for a lawsuit. That day, I went up and it was Judge Sweet, and Judge Sweet invited me back into his chambers. He said, come and see me after this is over. And I went in there to see him, and the lawyer from Penguin was beside himself. He was knocking at the door, the judge wouldn't let him in. He yelled at the judge saying, that's not legal, that's not something you could do. And basically what Judge Sweet was telling me was, don't worry about this. This is nothing. I had to have the academy enjoined. 4 years later, it was the same thing that happened in Australia. I got back to Australia, and the summons server walked in, and I got a summons for giving out the Sparkly edition in Australia. And I wasn't even there when they printed it up. I never gave away a single Sparkly edition in Australia, ever. I gave them away in the United States, but I didn't get sued for that. In Australia, Christopher and I got sued for giving away Sparkly editions. And we had to go to court for that too. And I realized why, because it was an international copyright. They wanted the ability to win on both cases. But the judge in Australia was smart enough to know that he wasn't ruling until the case was settled in the United States. And the minute that we won the case in the United States, we won the case in Australia too. And that's what freed the copyright. And again, I still didn't know what I was supposed to do. I just know the copyright was free. What was interesting was, at the time, Mary Ann Williamson wanted to publish a book, as well as Robert Perry. And Wapnick had threatened to sue them if they published. So I asked both of them for help, and they both said no. But the minute we freed the copyright, their books came out before the Sparkly edition even came out. So I never had an intention to publish anything. I just knew I was being used.
If everything's serving a purpose, I mean, there's stuff you're learning through that whole experience. So it's like a whole setup for stuff that you're learning. So for you, what would that be?
Just trust. Like the first characteristic of the teacher of God is trust. And you got to learn trust. And you got to learn trust at all levels. As above, so below. As within, so without. So as I trusted above, the trust became true below. As I trusted myself within, the trust was demonstrated outside of me. And that's all I knew. I just knew to trust. I mean, I would go to court and sit there. Finally, the judge in the United States, he got sick and tired of them postponing the case and realized what they were doing. As long as they postponed the case, they could enforce the copyright. And they did that for 7 years. You know, finally he said, enough is enough. I get what you're doing. And he used to walk in. He would walk into court. And every time he'd walk into court, he would say, he'd look at me and he'd say, let me get this straight. The Foundation for Inner Peace is suing the New Christian Church for giving away their material. And he would laugh his head off. And I would look at him and just say, you know, and he would say that they never got the joke. They never once got the joke and laughed. And he would go to court, and the first thing he'd say, he'd look at me and he'd say, let me get this straight. The Foundation for Inner Peace is suing the New Christian Church of Full Endeavor for giving away their material. Now, he had assured me that we were going to win, but you know, I just had to trust. I really just had to trust in everybody, trust in my brothers, trust in everybody. And this is how profound the whole experience was. A bunch of years ago, our lawyer was named Larry Fabian. So I went to see Larry, and he changed his law office. And he says to me, he says, "Oh, how you doing?" Now, Larry charged us less money. We only hired one lawyer. They had a team of lawyers. It cost them, this is another interesting thing about the case. They had to give us their financial documents during the case. And it turns out the Foundation for Inner Peace was worth $7 million. It just so happened that the court case cost them $7 million. So now I go in and I see Larry, and he's changed his office. And he said, "Oh man, it's good to hear you." He said to me, "I got to show you this." The judge, Judge Sweet, it was his name. Judge Sweet sent Larry Fabian a letter thanking him for allowing him to stay the judge, because it was such a, I don't know, it was like an incredible case to him. Larry said to me, "Judges don't do this." The judge was thanking Larry Fabian for allowing, because we could have changed courts. You know, we could have decided we wanted a different judge. We could have decided to have it in a different place because we were in Wisconsin. There's all manner of reasons. But we decided to stay with Judge Sweet. And Judge Sweet thanked Larry for not switching the court case. These are just sort of the crazy things that happen. And, you know, it's all just sort of events, brothers joining with brothers for a true purpose. And that's all I know. Now, I just heard recently, I think from Cole, that in Ken's book, he talks about being guided to sue me. And I haven't read that, so I want to read what Ken has to say about it. And the nature of the case was that Jesus, during the dictation, Jesus had mentioned that Bill Thetford was the one who was responsible for what would be kept in the course and what would be taken out of the course, based on Bill's idea of what would make the book too fearful for people to read. There was never mention of anybody editing it. So after Bill Thetford edited it, that's when Ken came along, and Ken became like the son Helen never had, and Helen became the mother Ken wished he had. And Bill bowed out of the situation, and together they edited Bill Thetford's edition, and they made some major changes in it. Luckily, in every edition, the workbook remains the same, pretty much the same. But the thing about it was, when I published the Sparkly, one of the things that Jesus told me was he had wanted Bill Thetford's edition out and asked Bill to do it. And he wanted people to know, if he asked you to do something and you do it, it gets done and you get the recognition for it. And he wanted to be recognized as the author. So it's the only edition of the course that has Jesus on the cover as the author. And it still remains the edition that Bill Thetford edited as he was asked to do by Jesus. And that's what Jesus wanted. Jesus wants people to know that if he asks you to do something and you say yes, it gets done. And he's with you to have it done and for you to get the recognition that you've given him in your willingness to say yes.
Teddy, I know, Jim, you've come online. Did you want to say something?
Well, thanks, Teddy. As for most of us, it was just the most amazing experience of my life, and continues to be. Love is real. It stays with us. It doesn't go anywhere. And all of us who are in that experience together, we love each other dearly, and we're bonded forever. And the fact that the Holy Trinity with me and Teddy and the old man, it was a trip and continues to be. What I attempt to do is to live my life with the love that I am. And sometimes I forget, and a lot of times I remember. I think that's just how I'm doing it, and I can't speak for anybody else. But I'll tell you, one of my favorite lines out of the course is, love is the way I walk in gratitude. And that's how I am. I'm just so grateful I was there, and I am there, and I am here. And then even like here, right now, today, where I am, with all of you, love and gratitude. So thanks for asking, Kevin, and thanks for being here. And thanks to all of you guys. Just amazing to me.
Yeah,
Amazing.
it's amazing. You're amazing. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think Janine had a question too. Janine, you still had a question?
Yeah, so I just had a question, just because like we've clearly had revelations from a young age that to some people it could be terrifying. And I don't know if I specifically read this, I think it's in the book. I read this somewhere or listened to it recently, that time is helpful to us, because if we understood everything all at once, then it would be terrifying. And I think Annie kind of has an experience with that too. But I guess part of me is like, why though? If I just understood it, if I just knew what eternity was, then why is that scary? Isn't that a good thing? Like, why is time a good thing, basically? Wouldn't it be nice to just know everything?
Well, the truth of the matter is, we did know everything we forgot. We remembered not to laugh, and that's what caused the great forgetting in the world of space and time. Now, what he says in the Course, if your mind isn't prepared, revelatory experiences can be very scary, because they're so not of this world and not explainable in this world, that unless there are people who are willing to understand you, like me, they thought I was crazy. I walked around, my psychiatrist thought I was crazy, my parents thought I was crazy, and I was having revelatory experiences. I couldn't understand how people didn't know this stuff. Like, to me, everybody knew it. If I knew it, everybody knew it. And the truth of the matter is, everybody does know it. But in the forgetting, or the world of space and time, that's what we can't remember. And instead of being, this is one of the things he says, instead of the experience being beatific, it's scary. So we get scared, and then we begin to push the truth away from us rather than welcome it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd have to say, Janine, this experience itself is not scary. It's more when you find yourself in time and space again, and that's when the fear comes up. And also because it flushes up everything in you that's unlike that. So in a sense, you've empowered that what the ego thought is directly empowered in proportion, you could say, to the light you've just experienced. So again, that can flush up so much fear and so much guilt in one moment. And then, it creates more resistance to the actual truth. You end up being more resistant to it. So resistance seems to become a problem in itself, rather than, so it's gentler in sense to be going through that purification and washing away the fear and having some context about what's happening prior to having the experience.
And I had experiences, or communication with something beyond space-time, or knew there was a way I could know things and didn't know how it was happening. Now, the other part is, when I think back of it, when I had that revelatory experience of I was doing it to myself and experienced what salvation is. I mean, my father and brother just happened to take me to a rehab, and everybody in the rehab was studying A Course in Miracles. My parents, they didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until about 8 or 10 days into it. And my psychologist was Lee Jampolsky, Jerry Jampolsky's son. So now, I certainly couldn't have put that together. So it must have been put together for me. And those type of experiences, when they become so synchronistic, I mean, you just sort of shaking your head saying, wow, how the hell does this happen? And the truth of the matter is, when you read the Course, you begin to understand how it happens and why it happens. Because our purpose becomes not of this world, but in order to leave the world, to return to where we never left. Because we all do know this. Now, There's another part of the course, another thing that people don't recognize is there's a teaching, and what it demonstrates is only one son left heaven. We have a brother that didn't leave. We have brothers that never left reality. It's not like all parts of the sonship became separate. That's not true. Now, people think that. I don't know why, but it's not true. We have brothers who did not leave reality. They did not allow that tiny mad idea to enter into their mind, and they never needed forgiveness. Like you're saying, there are brothers who know this and never not knew it. But we are the brotherhood that believed the tiny mad idea, remembered not to laugh, and in our remembering not to laugh, the great forgetting took place. That's why it's called a remembering. And that's also why it's different from New Age teachings that teach you have to do something. This is an undoing. You have to undo the forgetting, not do good works in space and time in order for God to love you. That's not the way it works, and it's not what it's about. God is love. God is but love, and therefore so am I. We've never not been love, but in the forgetting, we don't remember that. And there's got to be a way to remember it. And the way we remember it here in space and time is by joining with our brothers in moments of forgiveness so that we experience love as one. And the love we experience as one is what God's love is.
Well, thanks, Teddy. Now, look, it's nearly Teddy's bedtime, so has anyone last questions or any comments anyone wants to make?
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of bring up that whole idea about, things getting orchestrated for us. Things do become more synchronistic, and too, we have these incredible synchronicities. I mean, even you were talking about the pamphlet books. Well, Henry, Joe Dana and I collated zillions of them. So it was like I was even involved in that whole thing as well, which is really funny, just stuff like that, little quirky things like that. Here we all are. Vicky's giving them out. I collated them. You got sued for them, and we're all sitting here together. Just little things like that. Also, just things are orchestrated in a way that things are brought to us at the right times. Symbols come in that are to be used, like we've been talking about A Course of Love or any other things. Things are brought into our awareness at a particular time that are going to be helpful for us for a certain period of time for whatever reason. Now, I sort of hear some stories about that, like, oh, it's just your mind doing it, which is really true. I mean, that's true. But it's like, as an individual in space and time, there's no way you have orchestrated that. Just wondering about that perspective, like because the Holy Spirit, it's in charge of the Holy Spirit. Now, in a sense, the Spirit never enters into the dream. But I don't know, it seems to like, okay, I'm sort of getting my own answer as where I'm talking about it, because it is where things are thought is being broken up. The miracle breaks up erroneous thinking. So in that sense, and he uses everything of space and time for us. It's another thing, a friend of mine, he always says time is against you. Now, it's impossible anything be against you unless you use it against yourself. Everything is for us, and in the hands of the Spirit, it's used for us. So nothing can really be against you except for what we make it so. But just, I was just wondering what you had to say about that, Teddy.
I mean, that's basically
the whole idea of it being orchestrated.
Well, that's the difference between thinking with the Holy Spirit or the Spirit of oneness, and its only purpose is for us to remember, or thinking with the ego, whose only purpose is confusion, so as we stay in the forgetting, thinking that the things that are going on here have a meaning when they have no reality whatsoever. They're only used to keep our attention away from joining with the Holy Spirit and seeing the wholeness of creation as one. It's amazing. I mean, the Course is really amazing. One of the things he says is, he talks about specialness, and we all love specialness, and the ego fosters specialness. What Jesus says is, listen, God so loves you and honors you. He's not taking away your specialness. He's just giving each and every one of us a special function in God's plans for salvation that only we can fulfill. And the total fulfillment of all our functions is the non-necessity for the space and time that we took to fulfill that function. And we all, as one, no longer need it. And that's what's going on. And the Holy Spirit is the great communicator or orchestrator of the atonement. He knows the atonement and is able to use whatever we give him for us to learn of the atonement and for us to fulfill our special function within God's plan for atonement. Now, the ego would never let you think that way. And the truth is, that's why it says you're not alone. You're never alone. You're either thinking with the ego or thinking with the Holy Spirit. And the ego is an idea of falseness. The ego is an untrue idea which breeds untruth, untrue thinking. The Holy Spirit shows us the truth of our thinking as one in the creation of God, who created us together as one, and which we could never be separate from. But we ask for a special function so that we all have a special function in God's plan for salvation that only we can fulfill. And the Holy Spirit is the one who shows us how to fulfill that. And the revelatory experience can show us that we did fulfill it. If we give over the revelatory experiences to the Holy Spirit, we gain confidence in our ability to fulfill our function. If we use it as a weapon, like of the ego, to prove ourselves special, we don't get that advantage. And the advantage is the knowing that every one of us has already fulfilled our function, and we're living to the time where we all remember that we did, so that we no longer need the space and time, and we can go back and return to where we never left in the entirety of creation with all of our brothers as one.
Thanks, Teddy. All right, I think we can wrap it up there then. Thanks, Teddy, for coming on today.
Cool. Everybody okay with everything? Anybody? Sean, you good? Valerie?
Teddy, I just wanted to say thank you, because what you said about revelations and forgiveness and the difference between having a revelation and then connecting with your brother who is teaching you forgiveness, that meant a lot to me right now, because I've been struggling with that. Because I feel like when I'm by myself and when I'm studying the Course, I'm at peace. But then when I have to go out into the world or deal with my children or any other people that I have to deal with, then I'm tested. And, even as simple as road rage, just having to deal with the world. And so it meant a lot to me to hear that, for you to explain that that's what I was going through, and that I'm at a loss for words right now, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, everybody thinks it's just, we're learning what love is and everything's supposed to be good. We learn what love is through forgiveness. And unless we see what we need to forgive, we can't learn. And the only way we can learn to forget what we need to forgive is if somebody helps us see us. Because we don't want to forgive, and we don't want to know what it is on our own. We don't want to look at it. And we need our brothers so that we can see what we need to look at in order to use forgiveness as it's taught by the Holy Spirit. It's forgiveness to remember, not forgiveness to destroy.
And it's very uncomfortable and not fun at all. It's just been horrible for me. But I realize that every time I have these encounters with people, I'm growing just a little bit, as uncomfortable as it is.
Well, that is really beautiful, because, everyone thinks, oh, it's all love and light. It's all love and light. And no, it's like you're going through the sewer pipe. It's like Shawshank Redemption. You're chipping away, and then you hit the blast last section, and you're going through shit for who knows how long, and it's really thick tar shit, like it was in Shawshank Redemption. He's going through the whole sewer, and you really don't know how much is there. So it's really good, and you might have little moments, breakthroughs, where you're at peace for a particular amount of time for a moment. And then there's another lot of crap coming up to forgive. And you really don't know how that's going to look. But yeah, this whole thing that it's love and light. No, the first primary thing is undoing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. And that means the blocks have to come up and be seen in order to be released and forgiven and seen as nothing. Or the purification happens where it's all given to the spirit, and then what's helpful as part of that is given back in a purified form to continue on.
I mean, one of the purposes that Jesus gives us for the Course is, one of the purposes of the Course is to help us undo the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. And in order to undo those blocks, you got to find out what they are. And they're not fun. They're not love. They're hate. So you're going to experience hate. And that's the importance of understanding the difference between, like only love is real. Don't worry about the hate. It's temporary. Love's eternal. You're going to hate the guy in the car for a second. And you'll learn. And then when you turn to the Holy Spirit, he will give you the understanding you need based on the situation so that you can heal your mind of the necessity to keep repeating that episode, that incident, that way of thinking.
Thank you so much for Annie and Teddy, for both of you, for your input.
I think Sean wanted to say something. Did you, Sean?
No, I wanted to thank you for this time, and I appreciate spending with you, Ted. And I've been following you on the internet for decades now, however long. So, anyways, I kind of feel I finally met you. So that's
cool.
that's been nice. Thank you.
All right. You know what I wanted to say too. What's amazing to me, other than amazing being here. What's amazing to me is there came a point in time where we did learn something together. And it's as if we all had to go off on our way to utilize it, to know that it's true. And what I see more and more is like the idea that like Cole is back here, that Jim's back here, that Annie's back here, that you guys get together in Australia, that people are coming back together to demonstrate what they learned. And in the joining, remember what we cannot remember apart. And we've been giving each other this stuff to happen. And it takes acceptance. And sometimes we don't know, and sometimes we question, but when we apply acceptance helps us come to understand the truth of what's occurring, why it's occurring, and it frees us from the temptation to think that something has gone wrong. I mean, Christine, how did she get here? I mean, how do these people get here? Like, how does this happen? Like, how does this happen?
The whole orchestration, like, oh, that's right, because we were looking at a property. We're going to look at a property up here. And I was talking to the real estate agent, and he was saying, I said, because we're using it for a particular purpose, and he's going, what is it, like a retreat or something? I go, well, no, not exactly a retreat. And I said, I really don't know how to talk about it. I must find some language to talk about it. But I sort of described it a bit, and he said, and I said, I really don't know how. And he said, well, that's not going to be helpful to advertise it or to market. And I said, we won't be doing that. Everything happens. People show up. It gets orchestrated in a way. There's no need to promote it or advertise it. Everything gets orchestrated in a way that if people are meant to be there and it's conducive to the purpose, they find us or we find them.
These things come together, and that's what the miracle is. The miracle is brothers joining together in order to accomplish something to shorten the need for time. And as Jesus says, that's more important than revelation at this time. Revelation can show us the end, but we got to get there. Miracles should shorten the time that it takes for us to get to the end, period.
Thanks, Teddy. wrap it up, Annie?
Well, I'd just like to say thanks, everyone, for being here. And thanks, whoever the hell is orchestrating this. I don't really give a shit. It's sort of like when people get onto like, who did this and who's that and who's the you who does that. I don't really give a shit what you call it. Could be Santa Claus for all I know. But something is working and it's miraculous and we're all included into it. And we can sit here and say thank you. No matter how much sewage we still need to go through, we can sit here and say thank you for what we truly are in reality, whether we've remembered that in its entirety or not. For the miracles that we've experienced, for the miracles we're going to experience, for each other, for being willing to show up, and our dedication and commitment to the one self and the remembrance and the ending of time and space, the need for time and space. And just thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys.